Hi, everyone. It's Sunday, and there's been a lot going on in the news last week. And so I decided that I don't know if I could go this week without talking to my class, talking to you about some of the things that have happened on the news, some of the things maybe that your families have been talking about. I know our family has been talking about, but I'm so sad because I can't be in the class to talk to you about it and hear your conversations and hear your thoughts. It's just me and you can see Patrick in the back, and actually Tito is down there chewing on some box right now. Um, I've been texting or talking with Miss Christodoulou as well, and she feels the same way, that we wish we were together and that we could just kind of talk about some of the ideas and thoughts of what we're hearing and seeing, um, and see what we can learn from one another and learn um, about what's happening, and maybe know what we can do to either help or be part of the solution, even though that we're just maybe third graders and just some teachers that live in Seattle, Washington. Um, so I always try to think of books, maybe because I'm a reading and writing teacher, but I always try to think about books and what kind of message that I can get from them. And then since I can get from them, what then can I do in my life? We we are going to start talking about it in this week's lesson, actually, where we make a text to text connection, where you've done it before, where we say, hey, does this book or story remind you of something else that you've read before? So that would be where you take one text and another text and you compare it. And then we've always asked people to make a text to self connection, where you maybe heard of a story or read it and say, hey, what can you learn from it? Or have you had an experience that was kind of like it, that you know what the book was kind of about? You can make a connection to yourself. And what I'm going to be asking for you to do with these books that I might be reading is really to do a text to self connection, and kind of really thinking, number one, what is the author trying to tell me about this book? And I'll kind of talk that with you. And then two, knowing that that's what, well, one, what was the author trying to tell me and how do I know that, which is the text evidence. And two is, now that I know what the author was kind of trying to tell me, what what can I do now? Um, I think a lot of the things that are happening in the news, especially in Minnesota, there was that gentleman, Mr. George Floyd, who got into an incident with police, and he died. And we're not quite sure all of the things around the situation, because people are going to try to figure that out. But a lot of people are feeling a lot of emotions around that. I know I am. I know Miss Christodoulou is. I know our family is. Or some of your families might be too. And um, I don't have all the answers. We don't right now. No one really does. But we do know that there's people out there who are angry, and there are people who are hurt, and there's people who are sad, and there's people who are frustrated, and that's okay to feel. Um, but we, but for as a teacher and people who care about one another, especially like in my family and in my McGilvra family, I want us to say, yes, we do feel this way, but now it's okay, and it's okay, but there's more that we can do too. We can take that and say, because I've learned this, this is now something different. And that's what we do in books. And so the first one that I kind of wanted to share with you is about Harriet Tubman. And the things that I saw in here, I really didn't even realize until I started reading this book. Okay? So join with me a little bit and listen to maybe what you can learn about Harriet Tubman. And some of you might already know. That's good. Okay, we've already talked about her a little bit before. Like, who is Harriet Tubman? What did she do? Many of you know that she was part of the Underground Railroad, where she helped slaves escaped from slavery to the North, where they were free. But there's something else that I really got from this book that I hope that you will too once we look through other books. Okay. I am Harriet Tubman. This is by Brad Metzler, and the illustrations are by Christopher Elopoulos. I am Harriet Tubman. Oh, Tito. Do you know what the North Star is? It's one of the biggest stars in the sky. Unlike other stars, which may seem to move, the North Star always stays where it is. When you find it, it'll show you which way is north. There's the picture that goes with it. And the little words on there, it says, today, people know my name is Harriet Tubman, but when I was born, I was called Araminta or Minty. I was the fifth of 9 children born in Maryland in 1822. When's your birthday? I don't know. How do you not know your own birthday? It's because I was enslaved. Back when I was growing up in certain parts of the country, if you were Black, you were most likely enslaved. We didn't have a choice. Being enslaved meant we were forced to work without pay. We were treated terribly. We lived in tiny shacks with no windows. We slept on floors or in boxes filled with straw. As kids, we had to wear sacks. They certainly didn't celebrate our birthdays or keep records of when we were born. Worst of all, being enslaved meant that we were property, no different from a horse or a piece of furniture. That meant my family, my mom and dad included, was owned by someone else. They could sell us, and they did. So it tells a little bit about how her family was being sold, and one day her mom said no, and then they didn't sell her brother or her anymore. But one day when I was 6 years old, it was my turn to start working. I still lived with my family, but my owners hired me out to another farm. What would happen if we didn't do what they said? Our owners would whip us, or worse. I know it's scary, but by hearing my story, I hope you'll find strength you never knew you had. That's what happened when I was around 7 years old. And she ran away because she was mistreated. But then she had nowhere to go, so she had to come back. But then she started working harder and harder and harder. Then she would go out to the fields and look at the North Star and hear about things of people who was going into, that were escaping from slavery. Okay. And then here it said, when she, I'm sorry about Tito. Okay. My brothers and I planned to escape. They heard about the Underground Railroad. But they got scared and turned back. So I went all by myself. I traveled by night, following the North Star, just like my father had taught me. I stayed in the houses of people who wanted to help us find freedom. I was now traveling on what was called the Underground Railroad. It wasn't a real railroad. It didn't have tracks or train cars, and it didn't go underground. It was people who didn't like slavery secretly helping people escaping from slavery. But it did not have special stations. Hiding safe places run by Black and white helpers were called conductors. It even had its own signals. So there's pictures of people helping. And here it says, the password for the next safe house is a hoot sound like an owl. Use that and they'll give you a place to sleep. Thank you for protecting me. On the Underground Railroad, we were safe. So it talks about how she finally made it to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and slavery was illegal there, so she was finally free. So she lived there, she was free, she could do whatever she wanted. And people would say, hey, what are you gonna do now? And she says here, the answer was obvious. I need to go back. I need to help them escape too. That's exactly what I did. A year after I escaped, I snuck back into Maryland. Thanks to my own trip on the Underground Railroad, I knew people who would help us. The question was, no question, it wasn't safe, but it was right. In a daring escape, we snuck my niece and her family to the closest city, Baltimore, Maryland, then out of the state to Philadelphia, where they were the first people I rescued, but they certainly weren't the last. On my next trip back to Maryland, I helped free my youngest brother, whose name was Moses, as well as 2 other men. On the Underground Railroad, we used hiding places like attics, potato cellars, and barns. Some folks even built secret tunnels and hidden rooms, like this fake closet. We also continued wearing disguises. And then it says it's there, to stay out of sight, I traveled by night, sticking to the back roads, I also made many of my trips in the winter when people wouldn't be outside their homes. Occasionally, it was so hard to walk over the mountain passes. Even the big and supposedly stronger men would want to stop. I always kept them going, leading the way. On this particular night, we ran out of money, but I was so committed to keeping everyone safe that I gave some away my own clothing to pay for a place for us to sleep. On another trip to buy some live chickens, I spotted one of my old masters, someone I used to work for when I was slaved. When he came near me, I pulled a string around the chicken's leg and made them flap and scream. He was so distracted by the noise that he never realized that he was this close to catching me. Over 11 years, I went back to Maryland 13 times, personally freeing around 70 people. To keep them safe, I led many of them to Canada, which is where I brought five of my siblings, my niece, and even my own parents. The more I fought against slavery, the more I realized that the only way to win was to end slavery itself. That chance came as the Civil War began. So then in the Civil War, she was a scout, she was a spy, and then they ended slavery when the Civil War ended. But after the war, eventually the North won the Civil War and slavery ended. But that didn't mean my battles were over. I began to become a community activist and traveled the country talking about injustice. And when I was nearly 90 years old, my dream of helping others grew even bigger as I established a new home in Auburn, New York, for poor, old, and sick African Americans. Created a home where people could come and stay with them. In my life, I was told I couldn't make my own clothes, told I would never escape, but I did. I fought for my independence, and once I had breathed the air of freedom, I knew I needed to breathe it for others too. The measure of success isn't what you achieve for yourself, it's what you do for others. Think of yourself as a bird. Some days you'll come high, and sometimes you'll fall. But when you pass clouds and reach the top, you have a choice. You can stay there and enjoy the view, or you can go back down and bring others to join with you. The first go round, you have so many facts and things that you learned about. Harriet Tubman went back 11 times in 13 years after being freed. She freed 70 people and all that. She traveled when it was cold. She sold her clothes sometimes to pay for clothes for people to live in. She risked her life. She fought against slavery. But something that I noticed now that I read it a second time was that once she was free, she just didn't stop there. She went back to go get people who were enslaved, who were in slavery, and to free them too. And then when she was helping people get free, she said, "Oh, the Civil War is happening. I'm going to come help there. I'm going to become a spy." And just because the Civil War ended, it didn't mean slavery was over, but it didn't mean that people treated people who were of Black or African Americans freely or in a way that was just. There was injustice still, and she helped other people. So I'm going to read that last part right there for real quick. And then I want you to, I'll have an activity to go with it real quick, okay? When she was 90 years old, my dream of helping others grew even bigger as I established a new home in Auburn, New York for poor, old, and sick African Americans. So this is the last part that I kind of really want you to think about, and think about what message you think that this author was trying to tell us through Harriet Tubman. In my life, I was told I couldn't make my own choices. I was told I would never escape, but I did. I fought for my independence, and once I had breathed the air of freedom, I knew I needed it to help others breathe it too. The measure of success isn't what you achieve for yourself, it's what you do for others. Think of yourself as a bird. Some days you'll climb high, some days you'll fall. But when you pass the clouds and reach the top, you have a choice. You can stay there and enjoy the view, or you can go back down and bring others with you. In every life, we face hard decisions. At those times, we can make the safe choice or the right choice. Would you put yourself at risk to help someone else? Would you stand up to someone mighty in order to help someone else who is weak? To answer those questions, you might follow your heart, your own North Star. It will always point you in the right direction. I am Harriet Tubman. Follow me. I will lead the way to freedom. In the first part of this book, we just kind of learned a lot of facts about Harriet Tubman, and I'd like you to share some with me if you know them. The next part, I kind of want you to tell me about what you notice about Harriet Tubman's character and what that means maybe to you. And then we'll talk about this other part in the next day.